Being 6 o'clock, I call to order the regular meeting of the Ojai Planning Commission for December 2nd, 2020. Sherry, could we have a roll call, please?
Chair Quilisi,
Here?
Vice Chair Nolan,
Here.
Commissioner Lottis,
Here.
Commissioner Trent, Commissioner Trent,
Oh, sorry, here.
Commissioner Swift.
Here. Sorry,
Great.
it broke up for a couple seconds there.
Yep. Okay, Commissioner Trent, if you'd lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance this evening.
You got it. All right, where is our flag?
It's in the council chambers picture, yes.
Okay.
Oh, there it comes. There it is.
There we go.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Next on our agenda is public communications. Lucas or Sherry, do we have any people standing in line to talk to us, or any emails to the council, to the commission, excuse me?
None that I'm aware of.
None. Okay. Well, we'll move on then to our consent item, the minutes of the regular meeting of the Planning Commission, November 18th, 2020. Any commissioners have adds or changes to the minutes? They looked letter perfect to me, but that's just me. Okay, then I'll entertain a motion for approval. Commissioner Nolan.
Sure, I'll make a motion that we adopt the Ojai Planning Commission minutes from November 18th, 2020.
Okay. Do we have a second? Well, I'll second it. Any discussion? If not, Sherry, call the roll, please.
Quilisi,
Yes?
Nolan,
Yes.
Lottis,
Yes.
Trent,
Yes.
Swift.
Yes.
Terrific. Okay, now to the meat of the meeting, our discussion item, Title 10 cleanup, continued discussion regarding Title 10, Chapter 2, Article 20, design review permits process and flow chart. Lucas, will you lead us through this, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair Quilisi, commissioners. Good evening. My name is Lucas Seibert, Community Development Manager here with the City of Ojai. The discussion item we have up for tonight is really kind of triggered and centered around the process for design review permits, as well as the flow chart, which has been attached to tonight's agenda report. In addition to that, I have a PowerPoint here that I'd like to go over, and then we'll take a look at that flow chart as well. I'll probably pull up a Word document so that we can see it clearly. For some reason, when I was trying to shape it onto the PowerPoint, it just wasn't working correctly. So what better way than to blow up a Word document and kind of take a look at it that way. Hold on a second, let me share screen here. All right, can everybody see that?
Yep.
All right, so as we just identified, this is a continued discussion from November 18th, the November 18th Planning Commission meeting, where we were going into the design review permit components and talked about a lot of the challenges that have been going on, both by staff and then received from the applicant. And then, so what I'd like to do is to kind of go through an overview here tonight from the November 18th meeting, and then kind of segue that into the flow chart discussion. At the November 18th Planning Commission meeting, we reviewed the design review permit process and the director's exemption process, and identified really out of that meeting, really good information, great discussion, identified really kind of three main points out of that. One, that second story single family residential development and second story ADUs, those those require a full planning commission review. That was extremely clear on the 18th. In addition to that, we looked at the creation of a site plan permit process, and that would basically pull out that land use and separate that from design review permit. The design review permit currently would have its own findings along with that. And then towards the tail end, there was an interesting discussion about how to better serve both the applicant and the staff providing that information, and then also to the community. And it's to have it as a visual reference, the flow chart to that process. In addition to that, the current process itself, as it exists right now, it's extremely unclear, and you end up seeing this time intense portion of that, both for the applicant in terms of the back and forth, and that goes along with staff constantly having that interaction, and it's just highly inefficient. So in terms of the review of the process, I think the overall goal here is to try to work towards a fair, transparent, consistent process for the community, really. I know I'm mentioning the applicant and staff, but it's kind of an all-inclusive, holistic type of approach here. And then to improve the efficiencies of land use decision-making through that process. And from that, you end up getting some clarity and then improving that community participation overall. I think it's kind of the overall goal, what we were talking about earlier. The current process itself, I've kind of highlighted three key pieces here. It's kind of the preliminary process. That's that process before the application is submitted. And then once it's submitted, it falls into one of the two buckets, either a design review permit process or a director's exemption from the design review permit process. Before I go any further, I know we have two newer commissioners here. If either one of you or anyone on the commission tonight, if I'm using acronyms during my presentation or during the discussion, and you want to just wave your hand or pause me during this discussion tonight and say, what exactly does that mean? I have absolutely no problem going into it. Realize that I'm constantly using these acronyms on a regular basis, so it's like breathing to me. So in terms of the current process, we had that preliminary process, or it's prior to the submittal. That has shown time and time again with each application or potential application or inquiry that comes in to be very time intensive for both the applicant and for staff. And when I say applicant, I mean just the community in general. It doesn't necessarily have to be an applicant. It's people inquiring about that and asking the questions and not necessarily getting a clear answer, because in some cases that the code section isn't necessarily spot on in terms of its clarity. So with that, when an application comes in, it falls into one of these two buckets, as I said previously. It either falls within the design review permit process, and let's just briefly look at that component. And we're looking at a timeline here. These examples that I've shown here are over the last couple of years. Some are recent, some are a little bit older than that. But you're looking at a 2 to 10 month period to process. And that has real cost associated with that, and also time, obviously. The director's exemptions, a lot of the times, those tend to be, for simplistic words, minor. They're very minor in terms of how they operate or should be operating. And because of that, you're looking at a much, much shorter timeline to that, 13 to 30 days versus the 2 to 10 months with the design review permits. And then you're also looking at a difference in cost for design review permits in terms of processing versus.
Lucas, can I just ask one question?
Sure.
So on the design review permit process, is that the time that from the submittal of a relatively complete application, or is that including discussions back and forth about what to do, what should they include, or should they do this kind of project, or should they have some alternatives?
Absolutely.
What's included?
Excellent question. In the preliminary process, that's not the preliminary review process that would come before this commission. That is the preliminary process before an application is submitted. And when I say that that's time intensive, that is meaning that there's a lot of back and forth before the application comes in. Once the application comes in, the typical timeline that you're looking at here is this 2 to 10 month period that I'm showing you. And these are projects. Some of these actually we've reviewed within the last 6 months, essentially. Some are much longer than that and precede me at this position. So to answer your question, Commissioner Lottis, the design review permit process is from the time in which the application is submitted.
Okay.
Not the back and forth that takes place. That back and forth that you're seeing before the application comes in, that's what I'm referring to as the preliminary process, or prior to that official submittal. The same thing is true for the director's exemption. That back and forth that takes place between the applicant and staff, that fits, once it's submitted, it fits within that bucket of a director's exemption from the design review permit process. So, and then getting back to it, I think I identified, or at least mentioned, that the cost difference from that standpoint, because when you're looking at a project that's more in the long-term range, or is taking longer, it's consuming more staff time. It's more expensive from the standpoint of we're billing it an hourly rate versus these director's exemptions, which by the pure nature of it are considered to be minor and really don't consume a whole lot of time. Certainly a little bit of effort on the front end of it prior to the decision, but once it's out there, there's very little time, at least from the planning side, prior to it being submitted for plan check or through building for their review. So,
Lucas, can you hear me?
yes.
Can I interject something? Just so I understand the process better, the preliminary process, that's something that you're paid to do.
Correct.
You're paid your salary. That's part of what your salary goes to. Am I correct?
That's correct.
And when we do the design review permit process, that again is covered by your hourly rate and staff's hourly rate. Am I correct?
Yes.
It's not until you actually get into the nuts and bolts and that fee comes up, do you start billing back out of that fee. And that is in addition to the hourly rate that we are paying staff. Am I correct?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure we're all clear on that.
Okay. Does everybody understand what?
Or can I ask one more question? So what happens actually during this 3 to 10 month period? I mean, are they revising their application? What's going on?
Yeah. So,
I mean, this is for the design review process.
for the design review process, correct.
Yeah.
Like, for instance, Connie Sushi. A 10-month process can very simply be an application is submitted, we review it, respond within a 30-day time period, and that response can either be A, a completion letter, or B, a corrections letter. And then at that point, it stops our review and it puts it back onto the lap of that applicant. And that applicant then has a time frame, whatever the time frame is. It depends on how quickly they want to respond to get back to staff in terms of those additional items or clarifications to those items that were submitted, and get responses to staff within that time period. So the 10-month period tends to be a back and forth, but in addition to that, it's also scheduling the item for planning commission. That 10-month period, for instance, with Akane Sushi, that's from the time in which the application is submitted, the time in which the application a determination is made. And with the design review permit process, the determination is at the planning commission level, whether that's an approval or denial.
So the period of time between the submission of an application and the staff's determination that the application is complete is part of that 3 to 10 months?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes, it's from the date in which the application is received. Money is provided as a deposit. Exactly. Any other questions about this slide before I move on? No? Okay. All right. So with the continued discussion and within the thread of what we were talking about, it was actually 2 weeks ago, on the 18th. There's this site plan permit process that is being proposed to be created from this, and that really is designed to separate the use aspect out of the design review permit process, to have it being treated separately and have its own specific findings that are associated with that, where the design review permit would still be in place and it would still have its own findings, but there would also be a site plan permit. And we'll go through an example of that when we look at the flow chart. But for instance, CUP requirements, those are still in effect. Findings themselves will be focused on land use, not design review. That's the distinction between the two. Design review, for instance, as an example, would be changes to an existing building, versus the site plan review would focus on changes to the land use, whether those are minor or substantial enough to require planning commission consideration. Then obviously there still will be that appeal to city council and or planning commission. Those would still be in play as well, obviously.
so you would be suggesting here then another article in chapter 2 that talks about site plan permit process,
Correct.
and the excuse me, could both be done at the same meeting? I don't know.
Yeah.
I want to get to where we have an individual applicant having to schedule 2 different meetings with the
Nope.
planning commission if they're changing the use and modifying the building.
Yeah, and that's not the intention here. The intention here is to separate the use aspect out of the design review, and treat design review as it's intended to be, and as it's described, which is design of buildings. Here, okay, so hold on. You're talking about, if I was to say, or to identify just a random example, not necessarily specific to any projects that have come forward here, but a vacant building that's within the city's limits, that is, and it's in the C1, let's just say, and it's converting a use to a more intense use. All right, and it requires parking. And in addition to that, they're adding square footage to the building. All right, and it happens to be proposed to be a 2-story building to some degree. All of those pieces would be lumped together in terms of the process moving forward. All right, as a project, and that project would end up on the lap of, more than likely, the planning commission, given the parameters of what we're talking about. It would be changes in the design of the building. Okay, so there'd be findings and justification for that. And there'd be changes in terms of the site plan and the use of that building. All right, not minor. If it's including and requiring additional parking, then we're looking at it as a more intensive use and application. Does that kind of help? So instead of the 2 applications being treated separately and processed separately, the 2 would live within the same bucket and then proceed as a project forward. I think Commissioner Alonso had a question first, and then we'll go Commissioner Nolan.
So the site plan permit would only be used when there's a use that does not require a CUP. It's a permitted use.
Yes, that's the idea. These are uses that are already identified within the code, and that's use. It's also, so it's not only use in terms of what we're looking at here, but it's also site impacts. So for instance, parking is probably the best example for something like that. So if parking
So,
impact.
So another option might be to, I mean, we've already done some of the looking at the use tables, but the other option to this would be to put in more CUPs or minor CUPs for uses that are listed in the use tables, or this allows us to look at uses that are changing somehow, but they're still permitted.
So
Is that accurate?
That would be an example, although I don't want to necessarily get into the details of examples of what could be alternatives. That could potentially be an alternative, but here we're talking about introducing a site plan review application or permit, basically.
You do some of that as you do a zoning clearance at the front end of what is currently the only permit process, the design review permit, correct?
Yes, you do.
And you make a decision as to whether or not the land use is permitted, not permitted, similar to something that is permitted, requires a CUP, or in effect could be getting what amounts to a director's exemption because it's a minor variance or a minor CUP. So you're going through that thought process already, I think.
And that is, all right, so that's actually a good point too. So to cover both of those pieces, and I think Commissioner Nolan, you had a question as well. That's typically handled when we were looking at the preliminary review process before anything gets submitted. That's really where that lives, right? Within that process prior to that application getting submitted.
Okay.
Because the idea is by the time the application gets submitted, we know what bucket it's going into, or we have a really good idea of what bucket it's going into. Trying to get that handled in the front end so that when it does come in and is looking to fit into one of those two categories, we're trying to save that time when the application comes in. So hold on, Commissioner Nolan, I think you had a question, and I wanted to run through this.
Yeah, actually, it wasn't even a question. It was kind of more of an analogy. You were talking about the bucket, and it just kind of made me think of, okay, in our present process, for instance, a commercial property DRP comes before us. In addition, they may have be applying for a sign permit and or a tree permit. In other words, those all fall in the bucket. And I think we're just further defining what's in the bucket instead of having it be kind of a big glop in the bucket. We're breaking things out individually. And then depending on the project, it may make it easier and more streamlined for people to have it. And it's also just more clear.
Right.
So depending on what is entailed in your project, you may or may not need all of the elements in the bucket. But in that preliminary process, that will become evident as you meet with the planning department, et cetera.
And remember, it's two things that's kind of at odds here. One is trying to save time here and trying to be, I think, efficient, but also clear about how that process.
Yeah.
And speaking of flowing, here I've highlighted the flow chart here, and mind you, this flow chart that I put together, I've looked at some other communities, but we kind of had a head start because I know some of this internal staff had started working on something a couple of years back, but apparently it had gotten shelved at some point. So taking bits and pieces from other communities, but also using kind of what we already have in place here, I've put together kind of a stepped process in terms of how that application gets from point A to point Z, or from start to finish. You're looking here at the first, which is the application process, or the application itself, the submittal information that will be required, description of the project, site plans, floor plans, elevations, things like that, photos of the site. That all starts the application process officially. From that, you go into step 2, which is that staff review. Now, mind you, staff has already taken a look at it on a preliminary scale, right? And then the application comes in and we've officially got something physical, tangible that we're reviewing, looking at, and comparing to the code and trying to figure out which proverbial bucket it fits into, whether it fits into the director's exemption, which is the step 2A, or it fits within the planning commission's review. Obviously, the director's exemption being minor, the planning commission having that reviewing the merits of a project that have a greater impact. So in addition to that, there's a mailed notice that goes along with that if it's at the planning commission level. And wait, Commissioner Trent, did you have a question? No? Okay. And so that's I've placed that as a separate step because it's an important step. It's one of those steps that basically puts it online to be reviewed by the commission. It's basically guaranteeing that it's going to be reviewed within a certain time. So then if I scroll down here just for a moment, I don't want to go too fast. So in here, the planning commission reviews the merits of that specific project, and then a decision is rendered. If it's approved, then it would go through to the building permit stage, which typically has construction level drawings. There's a lot of detail that goes along with those. And then a permit would eventually be issued, and then construction started. If the planning commission makes a determination, whether it's approved, denied, there is an appeals process. That's a 15-day appeal process. I've identified that here as step 4A. And then depending on how that appeal pans out, there could be a disapproval of a project, which I think is an important piece to add here. While I think for the vast majority, you don't necessarily want to see a project disapproved, but I think it's important to identify that within this project or process or flow chart, there is this kind of flow of steps, if you will. So that's the planning commission portion of that. From a director's exemption standpoint, that step 2A, you're looking at more of the minor types of uses or design changes that you're looking at here. And then that goes directly into, if it's approved, then it is there's a 15-day appeal period that applies to that. If there's no appeal, the project proceeds to step 5, which then is again that building permit, which requires that construction drawing or construction level detail of plans. So with this, this is something that, and mind you, I'm kind of looking for some feedback from the commission, and I'm wanting to make sure that, look, I understand the process. I understand how we get from A to Z, but looking at it from the standpoint of a individual or community member or our potential applicant, is it clear to them? Is it clear to that particular individual as to what this process looks like and how it reflects? So I'd like to start it off with maybe that as a question, and then open it up for discussion.
Yeah, Lucas, can you scroll up to the top again to number 1 and 2?
Absolutely.
Because I guess my question would be for you is you're the one, you're pretty much step 2 between 1 and 2. You see these applications come in all the time and the forms coming in. Is there anything on the forms during step 1 that could be adjusted or altered, that might be some extra boxes or extra options that would simplify the staff review to make it quicker to know what bucket it went into without taking a lot of time to go through the details. So that was a kind of question one would be, what do you recommend? What have you seen like on the applications that might speed up step one as it gets into step two? Most of the issues might be in step one if the applications, could be better organized for your sake.
Mm-hmm.
And the preliminary process is not on this chart.
Yeah, I know, that's actually a really good point. So just so that the commission is aware, I lost 2 days with this last holiday, so it put me on hiatus, or it didn't give me as much time as I was hoping to have to kind of to sort through this with all the research that I was doing and data collecting. So I think that's actually there's two really good points here that I've already heard, which is adding additional box that talks about that preliminary review process. But then also looking at within that step one, and maybe even step one transitioning to step two, is there some sort of, maybe there's something in between the application and staff review in terms of prior to figuring out if it's complete or not.
Your prior chart said that the staff review began when the application was submitted. So it sounds like step one and step two should be adjacent here, and they're obviously in the right order, but it doesn't talk about initial discussions. And if we're going to have a site plan permit as well as a design review permit, then up there in those preliminary discussions, there have to be some questions, yes or no. Is this a matter for a design review? Is it a matter for a site plan permit? And it sounds to me like, whereas we have 2 buckets right now, we're going to have 4 buckets. We're going to have design reviews, site plan reviews, and director's exemptions from either one. Is that about right?
Right. Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Commissioner Nolan?
Yeah, I agree with Commissioner Swift and Quillisi about adding the box, the preliminary, set up your preliminary meeting to, review the project prior to doing your application. But the other thing was, and I think Chair Quillisi touched on this, that the language, and I know this is the first draft, but yeah, we need to be a little more specific. And for instance, like say in step one, it says application, description of project, and site plan, floor plan. But then if you go into the actual Article 20, they refer to all of that as the precise plans. So I think it just like coordination of the language between the chart and what's in the article.
Okay.
Would be just for consistency's sake, because I know I'll just say for myself, and not just with the city of Ojai, but other places where I've had to turn in plans. Like they'll say, a package or precise plans or documentation plans, and every community has they use a different language for that, but a lot of times it's the same thing. So I think it's just consistency and a definition as to what that is. But once again, kind of being consistent throughout all this. And once again, I know this is the first draft and you're getting feedback, but ultimately in the end, refer back into the article so that it's cohesive.
Okay.
Yep.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Hey, Lucas.
Right. Yeah.
Sorry, just wanted to point something out. On step 2, so really that's where there's the option to choose either the minor DRP or the minor site plan permit, right?
Correct. That's where you start seeing that first Y in the road, right?
Right. So I think on that step 2, maybe call those out a little bit better so it's a little clearer, so it doesn't look like one thing.
Okay.
I mean, I know you have the and or in there, but maybe just put it as a different line. might make more sense, because Steve was right. I mean, we're adding a couple more buckets, but those buckets exist under the director's exemption process, right?
You're
That's what we're
talking
Under
about
both of them.
Under both.
Yeah,
But
both
there's
equally.
no additional, nothing's being added under the planning commission review. That's still the
Yes.
same. The only thing being added is the minor site plan permit under the director's exemption, correct?
No, that's not correct. The site plan permit is being added both to the director's exemption and to the planning commission review.
Okay, gotcha.
In the case of the village pharmacy, if we had had a new process in place, that would have been the use permit. I'm a little concerned about box 1 right now. It says site plan, and you've used that phrase site plan to be talking about use. But if you
Right.
go back in, as Commissioner Nolan said, if you look at the precise plan,
Right.
it says part of that is a site plan, which shows the parcel and the placement of the building in question on the parcel. So maybe site plan isn't even quite the right thing to call the land use or
Site plan.
the land use aspect of this.
Mhm. Yeah. Steve,
Agreed.
I was kind of pondering that also.
Agreed. I think it's confusing.
Yeah.
The
Because
site
yeah,
plan that's called out, I think, in box 1 is what we currently have, and that's what I just said, puts the building on the
Right.
parcel. So maybe we need to add something to the application that is use specific
Yeah. Use
as
plan.
one of those things. And it's no doubt it's a part of the description of the process or the project, I mean. But maybe we could, put a few more words in there to say includes both use and design.
Yeah, I think there's two ways to tease that out. I think you guys are hitting something I think that's kind of interesting. And that is when you're looking at site plan permit, you're probably thinking, well, it's just whatever's on the ground. It has nothing to do with use. But when you throw use into it, it kind of throws you for a loop. So it can either be described within the parameters of that code, either as part of a definition that we end up adding, or the title of that can be manipulated, be modified so that it covers that, it merges those two different conversations we're having into one permit that we're talking about here. I think either one of those, or maybe both of them, end up working to help strengthen that as well. Yeah.
Well, can I ask you a question, Lucas?
Sure.
What's a zone clearance?
Right. So a zone clearance.
Isn't that where you discuss what they're going to use? Isn't that where you make a determination? Is at the zone clearance level?
Yes, that's at the very. That's
at the very front end.
Beginning.
I guess I'm lost here on the redundancy of what you're trying to achieve. I don't get it, so I'll stay out of it until it comes to me. But I'm lost on it, to be honest with you. I don't understand what you're trying to achieve and how it expedites the process and how it makes it less expensive for a potential, let's call it a client or developer or whatever, to do what they want to do in our community. I keep seeing this as an additional step and more. And when I hear the word more, you generally means more money too.
The idea is that those are all fair questions. I agree with those points absolutely. I think the idea here is it's not meant to be more cumbersome. It's to provide that clarity from a use standpoint. When you have a design review permit, and you start talking about a use that's within that design review permit and the findings that go along with that, it becomes confusing to, I would say, first the applicant or the client, but then it also becomes somewhat confusing in terms of how that process goes from the beginning to the end stages. By taking that use out of the design review permit process, not necessarily increasing the cost. The process still remains, the process itself still remains the same. It fits within the mold of a director's exemption, or it's a planning commission review, right? So if it's minor, director's exemption. If there's more significant impacts to that, either to the community, to that neighborhood, or to the site specific, then it's something that's reviewed at the planning commission level. There isn't necessarily, it's not, the way that I'm seeing this or envisioning this, it's not increasing the process itself or making the process more cumbersome. I think in all honesty, I'm just looking to find a way to create a, I don't want to say streamlined process, but a clearer process as a use would exist versus design review.
Randy, I see it a little bit differently from what it might first appear to you. Over 4 years on the Planning Commission, I have seen a lot of design reviews now, a relatively large number for the city, I think. And the Planning Commission tends to concentrate on what does the building look like, what does the parcel look like, what does the landscaping look like, what does the flat work look like, what are all the elevations, do we have those kinds of things, and the use is my impression. It's the use is largely assumed to be okay because we've been through a zoning clearance. I think if we had two separate but parallel processes here to handle design and to handle use, that for the people that are really only necessarily going through the use side of the process, I think the process would be a lot quicker and cheaper because we're not having to go through site plans, floor plans, elevations, or anything else that doesn't apply to the use. At the same time, the use side of this application would then, I think, force the Planning Commission to look more closely at things like parking, like intensity of use, permitted or CUP'd or whatever, doesn't matter. And I think that's something that's been neglected, and to a certain extent, it's been assumed that the staff was taking care of that and the Planning Commission didn't have to worry about it. Well, for somebody like the village pharmacy, they could have had a shorter, I think, application to add product in one of their cooler cases than they might have had to do with the design review process they had to go through.
Yeah, and actually one other example that since I've been on the commission was the community center in the PL zone. You know, we handled that as a design review, but actually a lot of the bundle of what was going on in that project was the use itself. Right. And defining a community center and then trying to figure out how are they actually operating, and then whether we needed to put any conditions on the project in terms of its use. And it's just very, very awkward to handle that through a design review application and versus a use application. So
the project you're talking about is 214 West Aliso, the old
I think
nunnery?
That's right. Yeah.
Right.
The project that's never been opened and never been used for whatever they intended to use it for.
No, that's because of COVID.
So I get that, and that is a good point. But I guess what I'm trying to get back to is we've got a planning director that I thought was making those determinations as to the use. So for instance, let's go back to the refrigeration unit selling alcohol. The planning director made a determination that that was an appropriate use of that space. And someone appealed it from planning, but ultimately it was put through. So it seems to me that the planning director made the right decision and then again was supported by commission. So I guess where I'm struggling is then maybe we don't need a planning director. We just need someone over there receiving applications and passing them on. But someone's paid and hired to make determinations. And I feel like we're circumventing that individual or that part of the process and turning it over to planning, which isn't bad in itself, but it's more. And again, I'm just, from my perspective only, more is more. So if someone can convince me down the road that it's not more and that it's streamlined and it's cost effective and it's to the betterment of all applications or all applicants, I'd be willing to go there. But right now I don't see it. So I'm still struggling as to what Lucas's role here in this is in making determination of use. And again, that starts at the very front end. I come in as an applicant and ask you, this is my parcel. This is what I'd like to do. And I would expect the director to tell me, yes, you can, or no, you can't. And that in turn expedites my ability when I hire my architect, because I already have had a clarification as to what I can and can't do or on that site. Am I wrong in that assumption, Lucas? Or
Hey,
No,
Randy.
I don't think you're wrong. I don't think you're wrong at all. I think, and then Commissioner Trent.
Yeah, go ahead.
But I wanted to respond to that first. I don't think you're wrong at all. I think what is, but I think I want to also clarify just a couple of things here. It's not that it's taking any sort of review process that I already have in terms of getting to the point of which bucket each of these applications or potential applications or inquiries fall into. That process remains in place, and those determinations are still made at the director level. Absolutely, that doesn't change. What would change is how those applications are packaged. I think is probably maybe even a better way to put it, where you would have clear understanding of design review and that process, design review permits. And that being, if you're touching the building, just know that it's going to be either a director's exemption or planning commission in terms of an addition or exterior modifications. The same thing is true with the site plan permit, which the wording can be adjusted. If it's a use or something associated with ground level modifications, and parking is the most clear example of that, then it falls into that review process, period. And whether or not that review process from a site plan permit is handled at the director's level, meaning it's minor, or at the planning commission level, meaning it has a more significant impact, that's still a decision that falls on my shoulders, on the director's shoulders, whoever's sitting in this seat. That doesn't change. It's not saying that it's circumventing that process. That process very much lives within this position. So that's not the purpose or that wasn't the purpose or the idea with creating this. It was to take that use component out of the design review process. And there's some examples that we've already talked about where it's been somewhat confusing as to why it was processed that way. But that's the way in which our code currently is written. So we're following those rules.
And we have had both at the commission level and at the city council level instances where two members of the commission or the council asked that something be brought up as a topic at a subsequent meeting. That did not negate anything that was done by another body prior to that time. It just meant that that body, as a result of two commissioners or two council members asking for a review, that there would be an additional step, that review. But the prior work was still done, and it was done properly according to an established procedure.
And I think, Randy, if you think of it as this way, like I'm a new commissioner. There's people in the public that don't know the process. There's people in the community that don't know this process. I think the director knows the process. The director is very clear. The director doesn't need all this stuff. But as a planning commissioner, this is really helpful because this helps me figure out, well, what is the definition of minor? And why does the director get to have a minor director's exemption for this project? Now I understand, oh, well, this makes sense. I can see how this would be a minor director's exemption now because of this. So it's not to help the director and to help staff. This helps, I think, the planning commission. I think it helps the general public understand what the process is and how the process works. So when they do get these questions on these projects, it's a little clearer. So when there is a director's exemption that comes across, we have a general understanding of why that decision was made. And we don't waste time debating it and fighting it and getting the applicant in here and discussing it, because all of that just delays things, which takes time and takes money.
And not only does it tend to delay things, it tends to frustrate the applicants, and that, or the person that's inquiring regarding the information. Part of that falls onto my shoulders. I think a flow chart like this, in terms of providing any sort of potential applicant this information along with an application, I think goes a long ways towards information that they've got in their hands in terms of moving forward. We have a process here. Other cities have their own process as well. This is our process. This is the living, breathing process that design review permits go through currently, if you're taking out site plan permit projects.
Yeah, and I think having clarity and transparency never hurts.
No, it's good.
Yeah. I think we need more boxes and more steps and more decisions. I think this is a good start because it gives us a large skeleton to start hanging smaller bones and meat on. And I think that it would turn out to be more efficient for both staff and applicants, not even to mention that it would be certainly more transparent to applicants if we had we could even call it a site plan review and include both pieces, design and land use. But if we had a chart that said, okay, you come in, you want to talk about a project, talk with the director and the staff, and we'll make some preliminary decisions about are you talking about land use? Are you talking about building design, or are you talking about both? And then here's how we handle those things. And here are the requirements that go along with those. For example, when Hip Vegan moved from on Ojai Avenue over to the side building of the old mortuary, there was, I don't think, a lot of understanding on the part of the planning commission when they put all that outdoor dining in, that there was no parking attached to it. It's in the code, it's hidden down there in many subparagraphs of the code. But if we went through a more formal land use review, and if it was only land use, then all those things could be picked up. Outdoor dining, parking, signage. There's a lot of different things that could be part of a land use review that don't necessarily have anything to do with the design of the building, which would pick up the floor plan and the floor area ratio on the site and the landscaping and those kinds of things. That's kind of how I see the two sides breaking out. And yes, there is a zoning clearance that's done, but there's a lot of stuff hidden in there that the Planning Commission doesn't necessarily go into in detail, and arguably should.
And just to kind of build off of that and potentially tear off of it, the idea of this site plan permit is not to make it more cumbersome. That's not, when I was thinking about this and strategizing how to pull the use out of it, I wasn't looking at it from the standpoint of how do we make this process more cumbersome. I was looking at clarity, efficiency, and I would say more maybe to a certain degree cost effective. I didn't look at this and think, yeah, how this more than likely is going to be a separate review application, a separate permitting process, a separate fee that goes along with that. That wasn't the intention of the creation of this.
I don't think staff is looking for an excuse to spend more hours on any given project.
Right.
They've got not enough hours as it is right now, I think.
So I think efficiency with a capital E is important here. And that in terms of drawing that use out and creating this site plan permit helps with that efficiency. At least in the examples that I've seen here in the short time I've been here. So anyway. Getting back to the flow chart, does anybody have any other feedback regarding this flow chart at this point? It seems like we've got some really good feedback at this point. And I look, everybody tonight, I appreciate the critical thinking that's been going on here and the important questions that are being asked.
Lucas, if I could just make one additional point as to the process and why, and a plug as to the merits of the process. Well, not really a plug, but an observation really is that, separating the second step of separating land use determinations from design review, it allows for better findings, and better findings are more defensible findings, speaking from a legal perspective. And so when these projects, an unsuccessful applicant, or if there's litigation or surrounding a project, the clearer the findings, the better it is for the city to defend a project or defend a decision. Sorry, not a project, defend a decision, one way or another. And so separating this out into, making, for example, a site plan review permit would, include changes to circulation, density, change in use, as opposed to the design aspect of it. And so it makes for a better record.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. I mentioned the separation and the creation of the findings specific to each one of those, but the legal aspect of that and the defensibility of that is also, I think, an important piece.
Well, I want to thank Lucas for giving us a start with a flow chart. I would ask that each of the commissioners take a look at this flow chart. If there are ways that you would mark it up or put more detail in it or put different steps in it, why don't you make some kind of an informal diagram of your own, scan it and email it to Lucas, and maybe he can collect a whole bunch of ideas and see if there is a way to put this all together that does not add complexity for people that are going through construction, but might add simplicity, in my view, for people that simply want to change use of a parcel.
All right.
That'd be okay?
That's a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Make a picture or write down your thoughts or whatever and send it to Lucas and let him chew on all of it and see if we come out with something that looks better.
Lucas, we've sent this to, have we sent this to the commission as part of the staff report or?
Yes, it's attachment
Yes.
A to the
Okay.
staff report. So yes, they have it.
So,
Absolutely. All right, thank you.
Can I make one comment?
Please.
I know it's not within the purview of the commission in terms of the cost, the fees, but I'm kind of concerned about where the threshold for minor falls and what goes to the director and what goes to the commission. And I look forward to more conversation about that. But it does seem to me that the fee structure may have some unintended consequences here about, influencing what should go to the director versus the commission. And I just want to make that comment because when the application costs $3,000 to send it to the commission, I'm not sure that that's in all cases really serves the community. To have a very broad to have the director exemptions apply to a broad or have a let's see, allow things that are pretty, that, let's see, in your staff report, yeah, things that only affect parking or building height would go to the commission. To me, that's a very broad definition of what would go to the director. And I do have some concerns about that, and I think we can talk about that in the future. But I just wonder how much of this, dividing between the commission and the director is influenced by the fee structure. And the fee structure may have unintended consequences because I don't think we want the director reviewing everything or, just things beyond what really are maybe not minor, at least in my thinking, but because the cost differential is so big, the incentive is to send it to the director when maybe it should be more of a community review. We can't forget that the Planning Commission provides a community review and a filtering of the project through people that represent community values. And I'm not saying this in any way to be negative about director review because there's definitely a place for that. But I would hate to see that we move toward more projects going to the director versus the commission solely because of the influence of the price structure. So that's all.
No, I think those are valid points. I want to just preface that with the fee structure is the same whether it goes to planning commission or director's exemption. It's the time that staff spends to get that project ready for planning commission, which is typically why you're seeing more time spent on those projects, which tend to be more labor-intensive projects that have a larger or more significant impact on either the site or even the community as a whole. Whereas on the director's exemption level, typically when those applications come in, I would say probably 99 out of 100, although I haven't seen 99 yet at this point, are ready to move forward. They don't need a round of review prior to a determination being made. So the price structure is still the same. It's just the amount of time that staff spends on those projects at planning to get them ready for planning commission. There's a staff report that goes along with that. While and that's at planning commission, while with the director's exemption, the staff report is the approval letter. So you're getting the bulk of that information bundled into that approval letter. And then that approval letter has all the attachments that go along with that, the supporting documents.
Okay. Well, I just am concerned about that. I think it does have some bearing on sort of what's happening maybe with some of these projects, but I'm just saying, I think there's some unintended consequences here, and it may be, that's all. It's just a factor that the Planning Commission really does not have authority over anyway. But I think it is a concern maybe for the council.
I would agree with Commissioner Lottis, but perhaps state it differently. I think we would probably all agree we don't want to see directors' exemptions on every project. But keep in mind, this process that we're talking about here is for discretionary projects, not ministerial. If somebody comes in and says, I want to build XYZ and use it for ABC, and it meets all the requirements of the code, then we never see it.
Right.
Because there's no deviations from the code that might turn out to be a part of the project. But beyond that, as Lucas said, the cost to the applicant in terms of the fee structure is the same. It's how much work does the staff have to do to prepare for a planning commission meeting as opposed to the director's exemption approval letter. I think we need to make sure when we get to a process that we all like here, that it has in it all the considerations that we want. We've talked about parking, outdoor dining is one, and those are parts of the code that are not currently in here. And I think we need to draw those in somehow to make sure that the commission explicitly looks at those things. And at least with the parking, it's going to require change to the code. So we're going to have to say, Mother, may I to the council. But all that's part of what I think is our job here, to make things clear, transparent, fair, and as efficient as we can make them for the staff and for the community.
Hey, Lucas, would it be possible to maybe have a definition of what minor means? Kind of to Steve's point, if it meets all the code and it meets all the requirements, then then planning commission doesn't need to see it. Because really in that line of thinking, if it meets all the requirements in the code, that means the public's already weighed in. I mean, they've already weighed in on the code, right? It's already set in stone, so to speak. Those
that cared to weigh in.
Right.
If you recall, John, at our last meeting, I mentioned 10-2-2503, I think it was, and that was a rather explicit listing of what's minor for variances.
Okay.
I think
we could put that in here.
Use a corresponding piece that says what's minor for design review, what's minor for land use.
Great. Yeah.
I think that'd be great.
And if we had those things, even if we just called out a paragraph or a section of the code within a flow chart, at least everything would be there and everybody would understand the rules. And I think probably a lot of what staff is having to do right now is explain the rules, explain as best they can to an applicant, either during the staff review process or that preliminary area. Talk about how to make an oftentimes vague or even contradictory set of code sections make sense to an applicant. I think that's probably a lot of what goes on. Lucas?
Yeah, I think you're making some really good points here. I think it's important to understand that the way in which some of this is being framed and being proposed isn't meant to be inefficient. It isn't meant to be confusing. I think what I'm trying to, and what I've been seeing from and receiving from in the form of we call it criticism versus complaints, is some of that frustration. I've been hearing it either third party or direct. So that's part of the reason for this. But also in the year plus that I've been here, and mind you, it's an infant. I'm in the infant stages here, but I'm seeing applications on a regular basis processed through here, and I keep seeing the same frustrations and inefficiencies keep playing out. Not to say that those decisions in terms of how it's processed don't still rest on my shoulders. This process still would have that in place. But in terms of how some of those projects are processed and to create some strength from a legal standpoint for our code, that's really kind of the gist of why, or the juxt of why some of this is being brought forward for discussion.
So, and with respect to the definition of minor, the minor is defined in our code. For example, minor conditional use permits are defined. Minor variances are defined in Article 25, I think, of Section 10. And so I think, I think it would be helpful to put those sections in as a cross reference. But minor is minor use as is not a standalone definition. It's tied to either variance or a conditional use permit, or conditional use. I'm sorry. And so I wouldn't reinvent the wheel there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. To the extent that we have material in the code already that can be made more clear, we should do that. If there's material that's missing or that we feel is not well enough explained, then we as a commission should make a recommendation to the council to fix that.
Yeah.
In the form of a text amendment. Part of what we've been going through so far has been, I don't want to say mindless changes, but it's certainly been, errata gets pretty tiresome. Lucas and I will both testify that it gets quite tiresome. But we are getting to the point now where there are areas that we need to start looking at that involve real questions of how do we do this, or if we know how we're doing it, how can we explain it so that it makes more sense in the code? And as we get farther into cleanup of Title 10, you'll be seeing more and more of that material. But I think this is a great place to start.
Agreed.
All right.
All right.
Any other points? Agreed.
You feel like you've got enough feedback for the evening, Lucas?
Yep, I'm all full on feedback.
Okay. And write out your thoughts or make your pictures or whatever and send them to Lucas and let him chew on all of it. Thank you. All right, let's move on to the next item on the agenda, which is director decisions. Item 3. You have a page in front of you, tree permits, sign permits, director's exemptions, and temporary use permits. Any questions there for staff?
Are you looking at the planning commission tentative agenda? I think
I'm looking at
oh, okay. No, I was
item-
missing this. I couldn't find the section. Sorry.
item 3, director
I got it.
decisions. There's a page of them.
Got it. So I guess I can make a comment about DE 20-016. So I did send an email to Lucas saying that I really thought that this project was not minor and that it should be appealed. The deadline is tomorrow, and I think Lucas explained that to everybody. But to me, and I know this is not agendized, but I just want to mention that.
Director's decisions are agendized, so it's appropriate
Okay.
to discuss at this point.
Okay. So,
So
this project includes.
Just as long as you stay within the framework of 20,000 foot level. And
Exactly. So the project includes 20 interior seats. It includes 6 outdoor tables that it's not clear, but they could seat 4 to 6 people is my guess. And then we've got a fire pit that's presumably going to have chairs around the fire pit and a game area. The size of the total size of the tasting room interior is 32% of the total square footage, and that's not even including the outdoor area. So I do not see this as a project that is in any way minor in nature. And I think that there are aspects of the project that really should have the commission review on it. And so I just briefly mentioned some of the issues in the email. And so I think the main issue here is this is not minor. I see minor as approving a new window in a commercial building, approving Tivoli lights, a paint change color, a very minor first story addition. If this had been a tasting room proposal for only interior with probably less than 10 seats, it has a completely different scale to it. And that probably might, in my mind anyway, be minor, but something with a potential for, at least 50 people hanging out on site, drinking, and then driving through down Bryant and trying to exit onto Ojai Avenue. It's just, I'm not saying that, in the end I would be against this, but I just think that this kind of a project needs a commission filter through, reviewing of the project and consideration and a fuller discussion and vetting of what's going on out there.
Okay, as I understand it at this point, and Lucas and Nikhil, correct me if I'm wrong about this, there are 2 ways this could come to the attention of the commission. One would be if 2 commissioners ask to have it agendized. The other would be if Commissioner Lottis, acting as a private citizen, wished to appeal the director's exemption. Is that correct? Are those the 2 paths right now?
Those were the 2 paths. So under the Brown Act, we needed 24 hours to we need a 24-hour window to hold a special meeting. And so Lucas sent an email shortly after Commissioner Lottis's email, blind copying all members of the commission. And in that email, he explained that a second to Commissioner Lottis's request from the commission would have to take place 24 hours before the meeting deadline, which is tomorrow. So that would have been by 5 p.m. today. So there is still an opportunity for this to come before the commission, but that would be 5 p.m. tomorrow, December 3rd, to appeal it under section 10-23003 as a private citizen, not as a member of the commission, as a private citizen with the $300 processing fee.
Wait a minute. Can you repeat that? You're saying that there can be no second at this point?
The issue is it's the Brown Act. We can't we have to set the deadline is close of business at 5, and we can't set a hearing, a special meeting 24 hours. We've lost our 24-hour window. So you can still
Boy, I
appeal
am
it.
not following that at all, but okay, Nikhil. Okay.
You can still appeal it as a private citizen tomorrow.
So you're saying that as of right now, if there's nobody else on the commission that wanted to say they wanted to appeal, they can't even do that. Is that what you're saying? There's nobody right now on the committee. And why is that?
Because the meeting would have had to be held by 5 o'clock tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly. The meeting would have had to be held by 5 o'clock tomorrow.
What meeting?
The special meeting to consider the appeal.
Because remember, it's a two-step process.
Okay, you know what? I cannot believe this. I cannot believe that the city has this kind of an appeal period that is so convoluted. You can't, I mean, this is crazy making. You don't see that? The appeal period ends tomorrow, and you're saying that as of the meeting tonight, there is no way for somebody on the commission at this meeting tonight to have a second on the request for the appeal.
No, there's been a 15-day appeal period. And you've had
yes, and why don't you have if the end of the appeal period is tomorrow, so
you still have the ability as an individual citizen to appeal the process.
Well, okay, this is crazier than crazy, and I have been around the city government world for a long time, and I have never ever come across any convoluted system like this, and that's all I have to say.
All right, does anybody else have any questions regarding any of the director decisions?
I have a little off, still on the same subject, but something stuck out to me at the last meeting that Councilman Haney mentioned at the very end about keeping Ojai's charm, keeping it unique. You know, there's people driving around with Keep Ojai Weird stickers, and I think something like this, where it's outdoor tasting, seating, convert one unit office into tap room, I think that's kind of part of Ojai's uniqueness and strangeness. You know, you can walk down Bryant and, you know, find a little tap room to the right and walk in and grab a beer. You know, I did see your email, and I thought about it for a long time. And at first I really agreed with you, but then I kind of realized, you know, if this comes across Lucas's desk and it hits all those boxes, and, you know, I think Lucas is keeping in mind about keeping Ojai unique and the charm and keeping it small and not looking outside its boxes. You know, I think Lucas's discretion should be supported and, you know, respected at some point. And I saw this and I took a double look at it, and I definitely did. You know, I think Lucas made the right choice.
Well, you know what, Jake, I appreciate your thinking, and I appreciate the thinking of all the individual commissioners on this. And to me, it's not minor, but I've been through that. And so I'm very concerned about something like this being approved at the staff level. But what I'm really, really upset about is the appeal procedure. So thank you.
Commissioner Nolan?
Thanks for saying that, Jake.
Yeah, so when I got my packet and I went through the director's exemption, I looked at that one too and I questioned it. And of course I didn't have all the details in front of me, but the things that first came to me were, okay, now there's going to be more people there. Okay, how does that affect traffic? What is the parking like? Is there enough? Apparently the tasting room is ancillary to the liquor license, so there's not a problem with that. But now you have, where before you just had employees coming there to make the beer, now you have people coming to taste. So in a way, it is a little bit of a change of use. But I guess my question, and maybe this ties into what Kathy said, and I did agree to an extent with Commissioner Swift, is, you know, where, I guess this keeps coming up for us, where is that line between a minor and not the minor, one that would go to the director and that.
Exactly.
That's
Yeah,
exactly what I was thinking.
what are the triggers that make it go one to
Exactly.
the other?
Yeah, and
And that came up to me. I thought, okay, I would want to know this. And I questioned it a little bit. So I think that's kind of the issue. And I think that's hopefully what we're trying to work on here is that we're going to maybe in this entire process have it a little more defined, like what the trigger is. And it isn't just for planning commission, it's for staff, but it's also for the applicant.
Right.
It's for everyone to understand further
Absolutely.
and have a little more definition
Agreed.
process.
yeah, so like in this situation, Lucas, would a definition on what minor means, would it help? I mean, you mentioned that it's in the code already, but maybe we can like highlight it, call it out, so these types of things are a little clearer in the future.
Well, we don't have it defined for director exemption, though.
No.
And we don't have it defined for development review. So,
Right.
What we have defined right now is the timeline on appeal of director's exemptions. And it says, if it's appealed, the hearing must be within 15 days.
well, the thing is, that didn't happen the last time around. I mean, we voted, and then 2 weeks later we had the special. We had a special meeting to decide whether or not there would be a hearing.
No,
And then 2 weeks after that or 2 or 3 weeks after that, we had a hearing.
Absolutely. We had special meetings that fell within the time frame of the 15-day appeal period. Once the date for the hearing was set, that's outside of the 15-day appeal period, and that was followed to a T.
So we were not outside the 15-day appeal period within the last time around with our special meeting.
Correction of what I said. Yes, we were within the 15 days of having a special meeting to set a time to consider the appeal.
Correct.
Today, or at 7:30 today, we no longer have time to set a special meeting to consider when to have a meeting to consider the appeal.
It's crazy, but nevertheless, the main issue here is what do we treat as minor and what do we not? And this project in particular has implications for future use of really industrial zoned property in the city for similar kinds of uses. The way the basis for the decision will form the basis for other similar kinds of applications. And I think we have to be very careful about that.
Same as the caravan outpost.
And we have to think about when we're approving something, how will it impact future development? Will it encourage similar kinds of things? Is that what we want? Maybe we want it. Maybe it's fine, but maybe it's really good to think about it. And that's my desire is to make sure we have a good process that things that are appropriate for planning commission go to the planning commission for full discussion and vetting of community by the community members. So I'll shut up now.
I think you made a good point. We didn't start this process quickly enough, according to the established rules. Any other discussion of the director decisions? All right, let's move on to item 4, tentative agenda for future meetings. Lucas, lead us through, please.
I want to make everybody aware that the December 16th meeting actually will have the 204 and 206 Kenyatta lot merger. I just sent out notice today in the paper, so that's going to the 16th, so we can bump that up to the 16th of December. We will be having a meeting regarding that particular item.
And that goes to the council for final decision?
No, that decision is handled by planning commission, not city
Okay.
council.
Unless appealed.
Correct.
Oh, sure.
That's
Yeah.
a good point. Thank you.
Typically, the usual caveat, yes. And you have some more Title 10 errata lined up, I think, for us.
I do, and I had some that was just about that's ready to come up in the hopper, and we pulled it so we can. I'm getting.
Something's happening.
Your audio's breaking up.
Jack? Where I am.
Is that better?
There's an echo.
Yeah, we
How
have
about
a
now?
Maybe
Can't
it's
tell you're not speaking.
Okay. I don't know where feedback from. Weird. Anyway. Errata. The errata, we have about 68 sections to go through. Can you hear me? Is it better now? Okay,
That's
good.
a little better.
Okay
That's
now.
better.
All right, that was weird. We have about 68 sections to go through. We built on what was there before, so I think we were looking at about 30 different sections. We've got double that now. That's in the hopper, ready to go. We pulled that back so we could really kind of focus on this design review permit process and the flow chart that we looked at tonight. So we'll put that back on the agenda for discussion, mind you, not public hearing yet.
That being the Title 10 or the
Sorry, the title 10 errata, yes.
that'll be a discussion item,
Discussion item, yes.
okay? And maybe by January, we can come back with a discussion of the flow chart and et cetera.
Yeah, I would say let's hold off on the 16th. I want to have some time to digest this before it comes back again.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions of staff? Then, Mr. Haney, would you give us your wisdom, please?
You know, I always try, I always tell myself it's interesting. Don't participate. It's really hard. I mean, you guys are really debating some really good things here. And like I said, ultimately, it's going to come back to council for some form of review and ratification. So you guys go for it. I understand the reasoning behind the clarity. I truly get that. There's another part of me that just always goes back to that old adage, if it's not broken, what are we fixing? Or are we looking, are we looking for a solution to a problem we don't have? So for me, that's going to be my overriding question, is that word just keeps coming back to me. Why? And I'm under the opinion and under the impression, and what I receive in my reports regarding directors' exemptions is Lucas quantifies what he's doing, why he's doing it. And when he sends a recommendation to commission regarding any aspects that requires your review, he has to write a report that clearly communicates his position if he's recommending something. And in his report, he should give you as much, if not all, of the information available that allows you to make great decisions. So I can say in the past, we have not, as a council and as a commission, received great reports. And I'm not saying this under Lucas, I'm saying in the past. And I think it's just someone just taking a shortcut. But I don't think that that's Lucas and how he's operating right now. So I'm hoping that when you guys receive a recommendation from him on anything, that you're receiving as much information and all the facts, because he should be substantiating his recommendation with facts, not with, I think it's so. And I think that's what makes this work so well. And I think that's what the gist of tonight's meeting was about clarity as to how he makes his decision. And I think that's what you guys are looking for. So I'm in agreement with that. How you achieve it is the process, and that's what I'm looking at. So again, you guys are just doing a great job, and if anyone watches this and doesn't recognize the value that you five bring based on the questions and the concerns that you have regarding our community, they're missing the boat, because you all believe in this community and you all want what's best for it. So I applaud you in that, and I applaud you in your efforts. And good job.
Thank you, sir. Anything else that any commissioner wants to bring up before we adjourn? Hearing none, at 7:36 p.m., I declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.